I think he did. And I hope you think so too. I'm Cheryl McAuley, and I'm really honored to be here. And I thank you, Lee, for inviting me.
You're welcome.
I'm really, really happy to be here with you to share my findings about Thaddeus Lowe. And in the interest, if you'll, John, can you hit the first one?
I'll get it just a second. Hold on. I don't want to go dead in the middle of the presentation. There we go.
I want to be sure that you have this website that's at the top of this photograph. It's www.thaddeuslowe.name. It's a little bit different. Thaddeuslowe.name. If you'll go there, you're going to find a ton of information. This website is maintained by Lowe's great-great-grandson. Lance Firm is in California, outside of Los Angeles. And he's been very generous with his materials and information, and he even came to Huntsville last June when I gave this the first time to our round table, and he flew to Huntsville, and I thought, oh my goodness, but he's very gracious, and we had a great time. So that's what Lowe looked like before the war, and it's quite a showman. I like to call him the Richard Branson of the Civil War. He's very much a visionary and a showman. He was not the first aeronaut to be interested in flying the balloon. There were others, but he managed to catch President Lincoln's ear and got the job as the first aeronaut, the first person to put the balloon corps together for the Union Army. I mentioned this website. Is anybody other than Lee and Marjorie familiar with? A couple of you mentioned that you were familiar with Thaddeus Lowe, but as a whole, he's not the first thing that comes to your mind when you're thinking Civil War. But he is an interesting character. I really have grown fond of him, and I like sharing his story. He was a unique American before the war and after the war. And let's see if he made an impact, and depends on your perspective. He was, the next slide please. Actually, I'm going to say Sawa Sawa, because in my other I have another presentation about our trip in Africa when we climbed Kilimanjaro. And I say Sawa Sawa to change the slides. And Sawa Sawa is Swahili for, okay, let's go on with it. And when you go on safari in Africa, your driver, everybody's in the van and everybody's driving along, and the driver takes you to the place wherever the lions are or the leopard and so forth, and he pulls over and we see the elephants and we get our pictures, and then when everybody's finished, the driver says Sawa Sawa, and the people say Sawa Sawa back. So Sawa Sawa, we're gonna move on to the next slide.
Make sure you repeat it.
So, what's that?
I said, make sure he repeats it back to you.
So Lowe was born in New Hampshire in 1832. At 17, he attended a lecture on chemistry by Professor Dinkelhoff, who invited Lowe to travel as an assistant with him to his demonstrations. Lowe eventually learned enough to start his own shows with those wages that he earned. He bought a small laboratory. He gave rides in a tethered balloon called the Pioneer, and the nickname Professor stuck. He never earned a degree in chemistry, but he took a lot of advanced courses in a university in New York. Typically, the 19th century aeronauts were called professor. This is a photo of his barometer. It's in the Smithsonian, and it's a mercury barometer with a sliding scale. It's made of brass and glass, and it's 39 inches long. These are his field binoculars. and his field glasses, also in the Smithsonian. And these were used by Lowe till about May 1863. This is part of the collection that Lance's uncle, great uncle, Leon Lowe, sent to the museum in 1930. Lowe intended to prove that upper currents flowed to the east and lower currents flowed to the west. Professor Henry, this is before the war, and Lowe's dream was to cross the Atlantic, and he wanted to deliver newspapers. The transatlantic cable had failed. He wanted to be able to go to England and make deliveries. And but Professor Henry, from the first secretary of the Smithsonian, said, maybe you should try just flying from west to east first before you try to fly over the Atlantic. Let's make sure that your theory proves. And he agreed to help Henry with the flight over the Atlantic if this flight succeeded. So next, Sawasawa, please. So he planned to launch April 19th, 1861. Gosh, what happened a week before that? Remember? That's where the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter. So he launched his enterprise, his balloon Enterprise. This balloon is named the Enterprise, and from Cincinnati, after a formal dinner. In fact, he didn't even stay till the dinner was finished because the winds favored launch. His crew sent him a message. It was time to inflate the Enterprise and begin his journey. So Lowe took off. He was so excited he forgot to change his clothes, and he got out there and they started inflating the balloon. It took 3 hours to inflate the balloon, and this was a 20,000 cubic foot balloon. The local newspaper, his editor named Murat Halstead, gave him newspapers from that day and several copies that he could carry with him, and others gave him a large container of coffee wrapped in blankets and a container of water, a hamper of food, and Lowe was ready for his journey. Lowe intended his flight path he was going to New Jersey, which was approximately 624 miles. Once inflated, about 3 in the morning, the Enterprise began sailing, but not as eastward as Lowe had hoped. She flew southeast, reaching an altitude of 16,000 feet over the Allegheny Mountains. It also reached 20,000 feet. 800 miles, and 9 hours later, he traveled an average of 89 miles an hour. Sawasawa. His path took him where he did not intend to go. You can see where he was trying to get to New Jersey. Didn't quite work out that way, and he ended up near the North and South Carolina border, and this little town is called Unionville. The distance between Cincinnati and Columbia, South Carolina, which is near Unionville, is roughly 512 miles. He was blown off his original course, and the Enterprise drifted over the border between North and South Carolina and eventually landed at Pea Ridge, Unionville, South Carolina. Very tiny town. We were there in April. So we have a picture. This is what it looked like in 2014. Lowe tried to land here, and that's not Lowe's balloon. This is a retired Army balloonist named Kevin Knapp, who's now, I understand he's now in California. He's not flying anymore. But this is a picture showing the shadow of his balloon. And Lowe tried to land in this field, but Confederate troops were shooting at him, thinking he was a Northerner. Remember how he was dressed. So he landed in this field, and he was unable to persuade the soldiers that he was not a spy. Sawasawa. We got permission to walk in this field, and we were here, as I said, on end of April of this year. And a friend who lives in Union, South Carolina, got permission for us to access this private property, and we were able to do that, and I'm doing my Julie Andrews impression. And Sawa. This is a cartoon that showed the event, of the time, at the time. He was arrested and he was put under guard in Union, South Carolina, and later in Columbia, South Carolina. He was very, very fortunate because some local Masons recognized his sign of distress that he was giving and managed to whisk him away. The jail didn't want him; they were already full, and with abolitionists, and they said take him somewhere else. So we went down the street. They took him to a hotel, and the hotel owner, Mr. Goss, recognized Lowe because he'd gone up in one of the balloon rides. He had been on the tethered balloon, so he recognized Lowe. And so things were working in Lowe's favor. People were beginning to remember, oh yeah, there was a scientist that was doing this kind of work, and so and so and so. So they didn't shoot him, and he managed to get out of that situation. The next slide, please. We were fortunate to meet with the folks who are on the board of directors of the Union Historical Society, and I was proposing to them that next April is the 165th anniversary of the landing, accidental landing, and maybe Union could have a little exhibit recognizing that. So we're working on that, and as a matter of fact, we're going up in October to give another briefing, and I'm going to be donating all of the books and things I've collected so far to go to that exhibit. So they'll have from October to April to get that all put together. There's a beautiful Carnegie Library, wonderful space that we saw, and we're going to be able to see everything displayed. And there are some of the locals also have some items, and when you're talking to an audience whose greats were there on the day that this happened, it's pretty amazing. Talking about preaching to the choir, I felt like I was preaching to the choir, but they were really wonderful, and I am grateful that they were in the audience and helped fill in some of the gaps that I had, and I learned a lot from them. I learned more from them than they learned from me. So let's see, what have we got? What's our next slide? So the we got there. So Lowe was 29 years old, and he was determined to use his service for his country and help preserve the Union. By the way, he took a train. He was given a passage by the mayor saying, this individual has my permission to travel back to his destination, and so he got back to Cincinnati, and but he did make a lot of observations along the way, and he saw how well prepared the Confederate troops were and the morale, and he reported that back when he got back to Cincinnati. And so some folks suggested to him that he take his balloon to Washington, D.C. And Professor Henry asked him to bring the balloon to Washington and set it up and demonstrate it to President Lincoln. Henry told him where to place it, and he did just that. This is the slide that shows the Capitol Dome is still under construction, and these portable generators are inventions of Lowe. He figured out how to produce hydrogen, and his balloons were able to stay in the air longer as a result of using hydrogen gas instead of coal gas, which is what they had used prior, using city pipes. So here is the location, and this is where the Air and Space Museum is now, in Washington, D.C. So the Columbia Armory was the building that was there at the time, and that's where the balloons repair was taking place. And the next one, please. Lowe's telegraph operator sent President Lincoln a brief account of what Lowe could see from the air, although the message was a little bit exaggerated. Lowe was saying he could see 50 miles. Well, if you know the area, Manassas was really only 32 miles away. Fairfax, not so far. Fairfax is about 20 miles. Falls Church is about 10 miles. So, as I said, Lowe was a showman, so keep that in mind. And there were resources that said that tents could be spotted from 6 miles away, and smoke could be observed by from 25 miles away. Once he read Lowe's famous telegram from the balloon Enterprise, and this was the first use of telegraph with the balloon, so using the two technologies, and the telegraph operator sent the message to President Lincoln, and President Lincoln was really interested in this, and he invited Lowe to come to the White House. He sent a message through Secretary Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, and wanted Lowe to come to the White House this evening as soon as you can, as early as you can get after getting this note. Lowe was staying at the famous National Hotel on 6th of Pennsylvania Avenue. That's also where John Wilkes Booth was staying the night before he assassinated President Lincoln. The hotel manager delivered Chase's note to Lowe. The president invited Lowe to spend the night at the White House and discuss his field of expertise. They spoke for hours about the military applications of balloons. Lowe proposed the possibility of an aeronautic corps to Lincoln. President Lincoln was captivated by the idea. The next morning they spoke again over breakfast. President Lincoln sent Lowe to meet with Lieutenant General Winfield Scott and deliver a note indicating that he, the president, was authorizing Lowe to head up a new branch of the military. How do you think that visit went? General Scott wasn't the least bit interested in Lowe or his balloon corps. In his autobiography, Lowe wrote about this encounter. It is almost impossible to realize to what extent ignorance sometimes finds lodgment in high places, and doubtless every inventor, every man who has a new idea is destined to make a desperate fight for his life of his special ambition. It's interesting to note that Lowe funded all of these operations himself from June through July. However, as some of my recent findings, and we have a friend who's working on the connection between the Masons and Lowe, whether or not Professor Lowe was a Mason, his brother was, and so that's some research that's currently going on. And I have a feeling that some of those benefactors were other Masons who were helping him until the Army finally started to pay for the operations. The Bureau of Topographic Engineers finally approved the use of balloons. Lowe was technically a contractor, and he was not a member of the military, so that was kind of sticky, because if he had been captured, he wasn't wearing a uniform, and he really had no protection. When the Confederates saw the balloon for the first time, the Enterprise at Falls Church, they assumed that there was a large force with it, and this proved to be an unintended use of a deception technique, unintended use of deception. Let's see what the next slide is. This shows the Intrepid. This is a pretty common photograph you can find online, and you can see there are teams of folks holding the tethered ropes below. There are actually 4 different teams holding the ropes. And Lowe is in the basket. You can see it's not very big. And the balloons ranged from room for one person baskets up to 5. And when they made the small balloon, it took almost a month to make the smallest of the balloons. But anyway, you can find that photograph on the internet. And let me see. So this balloon is conducting reconnaissance near Fairfax, Virginia. About a month later, President Lincoln asked Lowe to return to the White House. The president had heard that Professor Henry from Professor Henry. The president heard from Professor Henry that Professor Lowe was having trouble getting logistics and getting equipment for his balloons. He asked Lowe to revisit General Scott July 25th, 1861. I like telling this story because it shows President Lincoln's leadership style. He penned the following on a card. Will Lieutenant General Scott please see Professor Lowe once more about his balloon? As you might imagine, Old Winfield ignored Lowe's attempts to present the card. And by the way, this is the card, and Lance, the great-great-grandson, said that Lowe had 10 copies of this card made for each of his, he had 10 children who all survived, and he had 10 copies of this card made. And he had 2 of them until last summer and gave me one. So I'm going to pass this around so you can see this artifact. And I still can't believe he did that, but that was pretty special. So Old Winfield ignored the attempts to present the card. The general's aide kept telling Lowe, well, the general was engaged, he's having lunch, now he's having a nap, and President Lincoln was awaiting a response. Here's how he handled it according to Lowe's autobiography. All the time the president was waiting the result of my conference with General Scott, and with some heat possibly. I think Lowe may have had a little bit of a temper. I reported that General Scott could not be seen on official business, even at the president's suggestion. He looked at me a moment and laughed, arose, and seizing his tall silk hat, bade me, come on. He proposed to find out what was the matter with Scott. We soon reached the general's headquarters. This time the general's guard turned out as the sentry called, the President of the United States. The orderly saluted, and presto, we stalked into the presence of the old general, who certainly looked startled. General, the president said, this is my friend, Professor Lowe, who is organizing an aeronautic corps for the Army, and is to be its chief. I wish you would facilitate his work in every way and give him a letter to Captain John Dahlgren, Commandant of the Navy Yard, and one to Army Quartermaster Montgomery Meigs, with instructions for them to give him all necessary things to equip his branch of the service on land and water. It was extraordinary how things changed. The atmosphere cleared at once. The general gave the orders with alacrity, and when I returned with the president to the White House, I had at last the letters which put in definite motion the wheels which made me chief of the Aeronautic Corps of the United States Army. What do we got next? And that's it in a little bigger. So this photograph was taken just prior to the Battle of Gaines Mill. This property's been preserved by the American Battlefield Trust. It's another good look at Lowe's generators and the preparations by Union soldiers for an ascent. We can see Lowe. I love this photograph because it shows Lowe feeling the balloon to see how much pressure is in there, and he's testing the amount of gas in it. And this is a Matthew Brady photo, but here's Lowe. Can you see him? Mm-hmm. And he's got his hand up here on the balloon. And that is a Matthew Brady photo. There were other photographers though, and I've learned that in the Peninsula Campaign there was somebody else assigned to take those photos. So a lot of the photos that I've been using have actually been taken by another photographer named Anderson. The next slide, please. Here's the sketch of the of Southern troops. This is a deployment in Virginia, and it was made by Colonel William Small in Charles County, Maryland, 1861. So that's in Virginia countryside. And Sawasawa. This is the balloon Washington, and again, you can see there are different sizes of these balloons. And some say this is actually the first aircraft carrier. Actually, it's not. There was one named the Fanny that was captured by the Confederates and became part of the Confederate Navy, and that was actually the first one to have a balloon which was flown by one of Lowe's competitors, John LaMountain. Lowe resigned his position in May 1863 after many frustrations with the new commanders, so he didn't make it to Gettysburg. And I like to think, how many lives would have been saved had the balloons been used. And I think we've got some slides of the fabric coming up.
No. Not of this one, unless you've got a
What's the next?
section.
Here we go.
Section.
I wanted to mention the Confederate balloons, and there were Confederate balloons, and I'm going to show you some remnants, which I'm pretty excited about. And the next slide, please. We have, this map is on Lance's website, and I haven't seen it anywhere else, not in any other references, so I'm really glad I found this. You can see the two balloons at the top are Union balloons, and then the one that's circled in red is the Confederate balloon. And they would tie her to a train and run her along the railroad to be where they wanted her to be. And then there's the Chickahominy River, and there's a story where Lowe was in a balloon on one side of the river, and Captain Alexander, who was the field artillery commander at Gettysburg the following year, was in this balloon, and they were 5 miles apart from each other, and they could see each other, so. But there's the one balloon. Well, thank you. What's the next slide?
The silk thread.
Okay, here we go. So we were very lucky to go to the museum in Dayton, Ohio, the Museum of the Air Force, and the very first display, because everything was chronological, the very first display was the Civil War, and so I was very excited, and I took a lot of pictures for the presentation, and this was the remnant that they had in their display. They didn't have any other information about it, but you can see that it's red. There was a piece that Lowe had that had been folded up, like it looked like about the size of a deck of cards, and it was in a book, and so they found that piece in California. This piece, I do not know where this came from. And what's our next one? And this piece is on Lance's website from the collection that he has. And I want to describe it to you. The Confederates had one balloon for a couple of months as a sole competitor from May to July 1862. It flew over Richmond while General Lee put up a defense there. It was nicknamed the Silk Dress Balloon. It was reportedly made from ladies' petticoats from all demographics, rich and poor alike. However, petticoats were white and cotton undergarments. The balloon envelope was made of silk. A merchant named Langdon Cheeves paid $514 in Savannah and Charleston for 20 mixed bolts of unwrapped silk lying in the warehouse of Carrison and Lading wholesale fabric merchants. The colors were yellow, green, white, dark red, some plain and some carrying decorative patterns. It was sealed with a clear vulcanized rubber coating removed from old wagon springs, which gave the silk an unusual glisten in full sunlight. It also leaked. The next slide shows what it looked like from the back, and you can see a piece that's yellow. And this piece is in the American Museum of the Confederacy, and I'm sorry, the American Civil War Museum, and in Richmond. And the archivist put a light behind the fabric, so you can see it and how it jumps up. So that's from the American Museum of the Civil War. The appearance of this balloon reinforced McClellan's fear that the Confederates were planning an offensive against his left flank. For the second day, Confederates were able to continue fooling McClellan south of the river by employing minor diversionary attacks to command the attention of 60,000 Federal troops, while the heavier action occurred north of the river. According to Kevin Knapp, who was the balloonist in the shadow picture, between 1861 and 1863, the North made more than 3,000 ascensions using 7 balloons. The South only had 2 balloons and made fewer than 10 flights. And this piece was presented again by one of the Lowe descendants, and that was part of their collection. I'd like to quote from an unpublished manuscript about dresses that were donated. Every old woman who had saved her wedding dress rose to the situation. Women of all grades and conditions, children, young ladies, poor women who had but a single dress, who had saved it for years. Widows who had packed their bridal dress away in old cedar chests, took them out, wept over them doubtless, and marched to the nearest official, and with eyes glistening and patriotism was the cause of their husbands and brothers were fighting for, handed in the dress. Some of these dresses had been seen by General Washington, King George, Napoleon, and Frederick the Great. One woman described the significance of her dress when she handed it to one of General Lee's second lieutenants, with a tear running down her cheek. Yes, it is a sacred relic. It is a dress worn by my grandmother at her wedding. General Washington's arm had pressed that sleeve many a time, and the rustle of the old silk had been heard at Arlington at his headquarters, and in New York and Philadelphia. And that, sir, continued the venerable old lady, is why I give it without a pang. I give it to my country. There were many dresses collected in Richmond, so many that headquarters didn't know what to do with them all. Women and tailors laid them out and began to sew them together. Again, that is on Lance's website. The Confederate balloon, named Gazelle, measured about 30 feet, much smaller than Lowe's 60 feet Intrepid. The Gazelle had a 7,500 cubic foot capacity and was assigned to the engineer Captain E.P. Alexander, the same officer who would serve as Lee's artillery officer at Gettysburg the next summer. Alexander was a frequent observer from the Gazelle. She was a patriotic symbol, and Alexander used her to raise morale in Richmond. In a letter written in September 1861, his father Alexander wrote, "We sent a rifle shell so near Lowe and his balloon that he came down as fast as gravity could bring them." Are you showing me the time?
33.
Thanks. While Alexander was in the Gazelle, Lowe was in the Intrepid, across from the Chickahominy River. They were less than 5 miles apart and out of rifle range, as I mentioned earlier. They could see each other through telescopes. But they didn't have to, all they had to do was call down to their headquarters and mention what they saw on the ground. With the end of McClellan's command came the beginning of the end of Lowe's Balloon Corps. In July 1862, the Gazelle was being transported down the James River on the tug ship, the Teaser. They were following the activities of the Union retreat. Alexander ascended on the tethered balloon at sunrise in full view of the defeated Union soldiers. Unfortunately, the tug ran aground near Union lines. As they were waiting for the tide to come in, the Maritanza, a Union gunboat, fired some shots, and Alexander jumped into the water and made it to shore. The tug and the balloon and everything the Confederates left on board, including uniforms and belts and pistols, muskets, silver chains, bedding, clothes, and letters, were confiscated. Lowe reported that the balloon Gazelle was taken to Washington and cut up, many pieces given to congressmen and others as souvenirs. In his retirement in California, Lowe still had a piece folded in his office. The dark red material was about the size of a playing card, was found folded in one of his letters, and it's in the Library of Congress today. Alexander later wrote to his father, "I've never understood why the enemy abandoned the use of military balloons. Even the observers never saw anything. They would have been worth all they cost for the annoyance and delay that caused us in trying to keep our movements out of their sight." Romanticized stories of the balloon were even told by General Longstreet. Here's his full quote. "The Federals had been using balloons and examining our positions, and we watched with envious eyes their beautiful observations as they floated high up in the air and well out of the range of our guns. We longed for the balloons that poverty denied us. A genius arose for the occasion and suggested that we send out and gather together all the silk dresses in the Confederacy and make a balloon. Soon we had a great patchwork ship of many varied hues. The balloon was ready for the 7 days campaign. We had no gas save in Richmond, and the custom was to inflate it there and tie it securely to an engine and run it down the York River Railroad to any point which we desired to send it up. One day it was on a steamer going down the James when the tide went out and left the vessel and the balloon high and dry on a bar. The Federals gathered it in, the last silk dress of the Confederacy. The capture was the meanest trip of the war, and one I have never yet forgiven." According to the Dayton Museum, actually the South had at least 3 balloons in service, one of cotton and 2 made from 2 new bolts of silk of various colors. The South's inability to produce hydrogen in the field, along with material shortages, forced the Confederates to abandon the balloon operations in 1863. Lowe missed the Second Battle of Bull Run in summer of 1862 because he contracted malaria from the Chickahominy River during the Peninsula Campaign. While he was recovering in D.C., he received orders on September 18th to move his balloons to Sharpsburg, which was a day after the Battle of Antietam. McClellan expressed regret that Lowe hadn't been present at the engagement, because if he had, he would have had more information. Lowe told McClellan he was clearly frustrated and felt he had to do with his being a civilian. McClellan told him he would recommend that the balloons be made a distinct branch of the Army, and that Lowe would be given a commission, which is what Lowe wanted all along. However, by November, McClellan was replaced by Burnside, and the balloons were not being used. At Fredericksburg, December 1862, Lowe was not given permission to fly until the day of the battle on December 13th. But the fog that morning didn't dissipate until 10 a.m. There wasn't enough time to evaluate the enemy disposition of the wall. Lowe was observing from Stafford Heights across the Rappahannock River, which was a considerable distance to the rear. He didn't need telegraph or signal flags. He could just call down to the headquarters. And General Burnside was also relieved in January 1863 after a massive defeat at Fredericksburg. So after building a reconnaissance force of 7 balloons, 12 generators, and 9 aeronauts, Lowe's career with the Union Army ended badly in April 1863, when Captain Comstock was given authority over the Air Balloon Corps under the command of General Hooker. Lowe's salary was reduced from $10 a day in gold, which was a colonel's salary, to $6 a day. The other crew salaries were also reduced. Eventually, his father, Clovis, who knew everything about all components of the operation, he was also fired. Lowe wrote to General Butterfield, who was General Hooker's chief of staff, to tender his resignation. He focused on the financial sacrifices he'd made to keep the balloons operating. He requested reimbursement for expenses on materials. General Butterfield sent the letter back saying it should have gone to Captain Hooker for approval first. So he continued to serve for no pay through the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, where he reported heavy columns of enemy infantry and artillery moving up the river, accompanied by many army wagons. And Lowe resigned May 8th, 1863. Eventually, all but 2 balloonists were left, and all but 2 left. The last observation of Confederate troops was when they moved through the Blue Ridge Mountains in June of 1863, just before Gettysburg. There are 3 points I'd like to make about the effectiveness of the balloon operations and whether or not he made a difference. First is that by no surprise, the balloon operations were dependent on the weather. Thunderstorms, snow, fog, rain, ice, and wind made a huge impact on how the balloons were handled, if they were even able to ascend that day. Second, Lowe didn't discuss the death and destruction that he observed when directing artillery fire and observing the enemy. He witnessed horrible sights from the air, and it had to have taken a toll on him. Lastly, Lowe had difficulties with the other balloonists who shared his passion. They might have accomplished so much more had they gotten along. Lack of trust and little collaboration between John Wise, John LaMountain, and the Allen brothers was evident when they were all trying to accomplish the same goals. And finally, I believe his most successful endeavors were on the Peninsula Campaign, when he actually had the ears of the commander. Lowe's last balloon flight was after the war, November 1865, when a couple wanted to be married in the air, but the minister wouldn't get on the balloon, so they got married the day before and then went up the balloon. That was his last one. And we've got references. Lowe was nicknamed the grandfather of the United States Air Force. He had several other inventions after the war. He made the first ice machine, which allowed for the shipment of beef from Texas to New Orleans. Was the first time they did it, and eventually it was expanded to go around Cape Horn, and made a huge difference in that regard. He built a big resort in California on Mount Lowe, no surprise, and that was a beautiful Victorian place, and he developed an incline car. He continued to be an inventor, and he was buried in California, and his descendants are all over the country, and somebody else is doing some research about the Lowes in the Huntsville area, and it looks like there's a connection. So that's pretty exciting because the timelines work. And he also had an aviator granddaughter, Frances Pancho Barnes. He took his granddaughter to an air show when she was 9, and she grew up to beat Amelia Earhart's record. And of course she's another character with another story. And but I call, finally at age 36, Richard Branson finally made that transatlantic trip, and he was a visionary too. And I like to call, as I said at the beginning, I like to call Thaddeus the Richard Branson of the Civil War. And I think we covered the references, and then there should be a balloon shot at the very end, the modern balloons, and there's another one.
Several pages of references.
Maybe one
Websites.
more
There we go.
websites.
Yeah.
There it is. And that's what I have for you tonight. Or what are your questions? Sir.
You mentioned the original balloon used coal gas, which goes by several names: syngas, water gas, town gas, and it's made from steam and hot coal. Gives a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. Now, I don't know if the water gas shift reagent had been invented yet in 1861,
That I don't
but
know.
with a catalyst, you can shift catalyst and reagents using Le Chatelier's principle. You can shift the coal gas either towards more carbon monoxide or more hydrogen. Do you know if that's what they did to make the pure hydrogen?
I do not know. He had his own invention on the hydrogen, and I don't know the science behind that. One day maybe I'll get to learn about that, but I know he had to use iron filings and acid and something, and that was what produced the hydrogen.
Okay, iron filings and acid. That's that would not be the same as a water gas shift reagent.
Yeah, because when he was trying to, before the war, he was trying to inflate his balloon using the pipes, the city pipes in New York, and the Manhattan Gas Company couldn't provide enough gas, and so he wasn't able to get the balloon completely inflated, and that was another struggle. But I'm sorry I don't have the science about that.
Well, You're competing against a professor in his own right.
Oh,
I'm a recently retired chemistry professor.
well, congratulations. Sir,
I was gonna ask about the ice machine, how is that powered? Cause that was before electricity.
that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I have a photograph of it, but I didn't use it in this presentation, and I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But it looks like a big, old-fashioned popcorn maker, you know, the glass on each side and the windows.
Yeah,
Pretty
it's
large.
probably an isoenthalpic expansion
Might have
of
been
gas.
steam. Excuse me.
You know, gas expands through an orifice.
6:55.
into a vacuum.
Anybody else? Questions? Robert's not here to ask the good ones.
I want to invite you to visit our Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable, and we meet on the third Thursday of the.
Second Thursday.
I'm sorry, second Thursday of the month. Thank you. It's on the back of the card there. And can you tell my mind is in different places? And during the Sesquicentennial many years ago, the Roundtable and the Huntsville Historical Society put this map together, and it's what the town of Huntsville looked like during the Civil War. So we have those. If you're interested, we can pass those out. They're free. Could you make those available to anybody who would like them?
Lee will take them.
And so, yeah, and Lee, and I would love for Lee to be one of our officers in the Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable, but his first love is here.
I've
And
done my round.
he was our treasurer, what, 15 years ago or something, at least, and I would love to have him back. So thank you for letting me share him tonight, and, thanks for the invitation, I really
Quite
appreciate
welcome,
it.
Cheryl. Thanks for-
Thank you.